It is 2:14 a.m. on his 40th birthday, and Marcus is standing ankle-deep in gray water in the basement of a duplex he bought 15 years ago. His hands are raw from a rusted valve that just snapped, spraying freezing water into his face. On his phone, a notification glows. His old roommate, who spent his 20s investing in boring index funds, just posted a photo from a quiet beach in Portugal. Marcus stares at his reflection in the muddy water, realizing his millions on paper cannot buy him a single dry towel. There was one hidden contract he signed in his 20s that he never actually read. Before we go back, ask yourself, would you rather own an asset that makes you look rich, or one that lets you sleep? Let us go back to when Marcus was 24. He had just watched 300 hours of real estate YouTube videos and felt like he had cracked the matrix. While his coworker Sarah was setting up an automatic contribution of $400 a month into a dull S&P 500 index fund, Marcus was out hunting for properties. He viewed Sarah's strategy with a sort of smug pity. Why wait 40 years to get rich when you could use other people's money to build an empire today? He pooled every dollar of his savings, exactly $14,000, and bought a fixer-upper triplex using an FHA loan with just 3.5% down. On paper, it was beautiful. The rent from the other two units covered his entire mortgage and left him with pure cash flow. He remembers standing on the porch of that triplex on a warm summer evening, feeling like a genius. He looked down at his dirty work boots and smiled, convinced that the sweat equity he was putting in was the ultimate shortcut to early retirement. Sarah, meanwhile, was just staring at a spreadsheet, her portfolio barely moving by a few dollars a week. Marcus was playing the game on high-leverage fast-forward, while Sarah was walking in slow motion. He was certain that by the time they reached 40, the gap between them would be an uncrossable ocean. But the math of your 20s has a funny way of mutating once you hit your 30s. Marcus thought he was signing a standard 30-year mortgage, but what he actually signed was a hidden contract, one that traded away his weekends, his sleep, his marriage, and his undivided attention. The first wave of friction was physical and immediate. Marcus quickly learned that tenants do not care about your financial freedom. When a tenant lost his job and stopped paying, Marcus was dragged into a brutal eviction battle that drained his emergency fund. Every weekend became a marathon of painting drywall and repairing clogged toilets. The second wave was financial illiquidity. At 32, Marcus was a paper millionaire. His properties had appreciated beautifully. But when he married and wanted to buy a home for his new family, he was met with a wall of red tape. The wealth was locked tight behind brick and mortar. He found himself in the agonizing position of having a massive net worth on a spreadsheet, but barely enough cash flow to handle a major life transition. The third wave was the emotional and social toll, and it hit hardest on his 5th wedding anniversary. Marcus and his wife were sitting at a beautiful, dimly lit restaurant. Just as the appetizers arrived, his phone lit up. The furnace at Unit B had died in freezing temperatures. Marcus had to step outside into the cold to manage the crisis, calling contractors and trying to avoid a tenant lawsuit. When he finally walked back into the restaurant 30 minutes later, his food was cold, and his wife was staring at him in dead silence. She had begun to look at his properties not as assets, but as mistresses that constantly stole his presence. Every conversation about their future revolved around capital expenditures, property taxes, and rising insurance premiums. And this is the question most people never ask before buying their first rental. Are you buying freedom, or are you buying a second job with better branding? Meanwhile, Sarah was quietly living a parallel life. Her index fund portfolio had crossed the $500,000 mark. She had no tenants to manage, no roofs to repair, and no late-night phone calls. Every time the market dipped, she did nothing. She spent her weekends hiking in the mountains. Because she turned her phone off at 8 p.m. and slept peacefully while her portfolio ran in the background, she had the mental energy to excel at work, landing consecutive promotions that doubled her salary. Marcus, exhausted from his day job and his second job as a landlord, found himself missing out on those same career advancements. His hair was thinning, his blood pressure was rising, and he was trapped in a golden cage of his own design. He had built an empire of bricks, but the mortar holding it together was his own sweat and sanity. Real estate is not the villain here. Real estate can build tremendous wealth, but it is not free wealth. It charges you in time, attention, liquidity, and emotional bandwidth. The mistake Marcus made wasn't buying properties. His mistake was treating a highly leveraged operating business like a passive investment. What Marcus could not see at 24 was that every property carried a cost that never appeared on the spreadsheet: the cognitive tax. Think of your brain like a computer with a finite amount of RAM. Every stock Sarah owns runs silently in the background, consuming almost no mental space. She buys it, it compounds, and her brain remains free for her career, her relationships, and her life. But every rental property Marcus owns is a heavy, unoptimized program. Even when he is sitting at an anniversary dinner, part of his mind is constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The next leak, the next tax assessment, the next text message. By 40, that cognitive tax starts to bankrupt your relationships. Then, there is the leverage pivot point. In your 20s, leverage is a cheat code. Visually, the math is staggering. Marcus put $14,000 down on a $400,000 triplex. A mere 5% increase in property value meant a $20,000 gain. That is a 140% return on his actual cash invested. But as your net worth grows, the risk completely flips. By 38, Marcus owned properties worth $2 million, but he was standing under a crushing weight of $1.5 million in debt. If the market dropped by just 15%, that heavy debt stack would wipe his paper equity to zero, leaving him with unpayable commercial mortgages. At some point, Marcus did not need more doors. He needed to ask whether the doors he already owned were still buying him freedom. Instead of buying a second and third rental property, he could have used the natural appreciation of his first triplex to execute a strategic pivot. By selling it at the peak of the market, he could have extracted his clean equity and channeled it directly into low-cost, passive index funds. In a way, buying a broad index fund means owning tiny pieces of companies run by people whose job is to solve problems while you sleep. They manage supply chains, compete in markets, deal with regulatory headaches, and make decisions you never have to make. Your only job is to get out of their way. Sarah's wealth was quiet and liquid. When she wanted to take a sabbatical to travel Europe, she did not have to worry about vacancies or property managers. She simply clicked a button, transferred cash from her brokerage account, and boarded a plane. She realized that the highest return on investment is actually the return on peace. Which brings us back to that freezing basement on Marcus's 40th birthday. Standing in the gray water, exhausted and defeated, Marcus finally sees the full picture. He realizes his leverage has become a liability. Marcus finally exits the contract he never meant to sign. For the first time, he stopped asking how many more doors he could buy and started asking how many he needed to escape from. A few months later, sitting on his porch on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Marcus signs the closing documents on his last rental property. The sale is complete. The proceeds settle into his brokerage account, quietly split across broad market index funds. He takes a long, deep breath, the first one that does not feel heavy in 15 years. His phone sits on the table beside him, completely silent. There are no emergency maintenance calls coming, no tenant disputes to resolve. He watches the sun dip below the horizon. He realizes now that a door is only freedom if you can close it and walk away. True wealth is not measured by the number of doors you own, but by the number of doors you can walk away from. Would you rather own 10 rental doors that call you at 2 a.m. or one quiet portfolio that lets you sleep? Comment your answer below. This video is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Outcomes vary based on your situation.